what inspired you to start a men's group and run that for 2 decades? That's...
And the men were trying to be emotionally available, which is exactly what most women want. Okay?
An emotionally available man.
And these guys were the exception to start with. They were trying to be that, but they were getting beat up constantly. The biggest thing about men coming in into a group was that the men felt like they had to keep this front up with the other men. That I'm not going to be a man if I let you know I have feelings.
Especially with men, I feel they can't express, they're told to be strong, and being vulnerable is, oh, you can't do this.
Because just getting them through the door was the hard part, okay?
Once they are in?
Once they were in, and if they got the bug and they felt heard and they felt responded to, they didn't want to leave, okay?
So like you say, by the age of 10, they are told to shut down. And then as they grow, then there is a point where the women in their house, maybe it's the wife or the daughter or the mother, now want them to speak up.
Yeah. How ironic is that? Okay, and that's my point. Their way of dealing with things. I mean, one guy described it to me. He says, yeah, we go to the gym. A woman will sit and talk about her divorce and on and on. He said, we go in there and, yeah, you're divorced. Yeah, it's a bitch. Lift my weight. Lift my weight.
What is one thing you wish more people understood about men's emotional health?
They need permission. And that's exactly what you said. They need permission to be vulnerable, be themselves, be okay.
Welcome to Let's Talk, a podcast on mental health, healing, and human connections. I'm Rashmi Sundaram, a mental health practitioner and psychodrama learner. In this series, we will explore the power of psychodrama with Norma Kay Lord. Kay is a licensed clinical social worker, marriage and family therapist, licensed group therapist, with an experience of about 40 years in the mental health space. She's a trainer, educator, practitioner in psychodrama, sociometry, and group therapy. She's the founder of Houston Psychodrama Institute and CAST. And now she wants to channel her passion and energies in India with HOPE, House of Psychodrama Education. HOPE's vision is to make psychodrama accessible and affordable to everyone. In today's episode, let's talk about men's mental health. Why is it so difficult for men to open up? And what can we do to help them? It's high time we start talking about this. Let's talk with Norma Kay Lord, who has run a men's group for more than 20 years. Hi, Kay. Welcome on the podcast.
Hi, Rashmi.
How are you today?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah. Kay, you've led so many groups over the years. So, from your experience, what makes group work so powerful?
In groups, there's only so far as you can go in individual therapy as a therapist. And I discovered that, number one, people need support, and they need to have a resource and a set of support systems that are beyond you, the therapist. Sometimes that's their family, and sometimes it's not. Okay? So having that is one aspect. The other thing is, in a group, you get reflected back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Things that are positive, sometimes things that you need to change, okay? But it's a true thing. It's not about that they have any vested interest. They're not in a role as a wife, mother, husband, friend, employer. So sometimes that helps a person really look at things, because when we're defined, and Moreno believed that the self emerges from the roles. So the minute you enter this world, you have a role. You may be eldest daughter, eldest son, youngest son, the first boy in the family of generations, or the first girl. And so there's already a set role between you and who's in the family. Now, how you respond to that also defines who you are. Some people push their roles away because it's too much, okay? We also say sometimes there's the child that's going to be the hero in the family and going to fix everything.
The fixer child.
Well, the hero, or, the one that is going to be the first one to get that education. Okay? There's a lot of pressure on that. Or maybe the child that will mend what happened with you and your in-laws. Okay? Because now there's a grandchild, so that's going to make everything different.
Yeah.
But no matter what it is, you come in with that. And then as you proceed through life, you have a lot of different roles. Well, usually when somebody wants a change, it's because whatever their life's being, it's not working for them. Maybe they question, are they really defined the way their family defines them? Well, you come into a group with other people, and they're going to reflect back what they see.
What they see in you?
What they see in you, okay? And so many times I, as a therapist, can also tell you that I can help you look at things and work on things. The true test is in a group. We live in a group. We work in a group.
Yeah.
Everything is
social beings.
Right. Everything is about that. So you test out, like if someone says, oh, I want to learn how to say no. Well, we may design an exercise where you have to say no to the person next to you about something. And then you find out, how uncomfortable do I still feel about that? But groups have a lot of power too, because sometimes to break the cycle of trauma, it takes all of the group support to help that person move. So to me, I found that groups give me a truer version, okay, of what's really going on, okay, with that person.
Like a container that just holds everything in.
Well, and not only that, what enters into that room are all the social systems, all the norms. So you start seeing how that gets played out. I mean, I once had a group of, and still now do have a group of women with maybe a few men in it, okay? Well, there's often a lot of hidden expectations, okay? But those come out on both sides, okay? And those are necessary to bring about change, not only in the group, but change within us, okay? So groups to me carry a lot more energy. And the other thing that's interesting, if you know how to harness that, you're not as tired as a group leader as you might think. But most therapists are very intimidated by groups. It's like they feel outnumbered.
Oh.
Okay?
Because it's the whole group
it's
that's
the
working.
whole groups.
Yes.
Okay? And it helped me in working with groups be a better family therapist and a better couples therapist.
True.
So that's why I just kept working groups. It wasn't that I didn't do individual therapy, but at certain points, I would tell people, if you want to make more progress, this is where you're going to make it.
In groups.
In groups.
That's interesting. But what I really want to know, what inspired you to start a men's group and run that for 2 decades? That's...
Well, the way that I started it was kind of a back door, all right? if I really think about it, I would have people come in for couples therapy, okay? Maybe I would have had the woman in therapy, whatever. The funny part was the men stayed,
Oh.
okay? Because just getting them through the door was the hard part, okay?
Once they are in?
Once they were in, and if they got the bug and they felt heard and they felt responded to, they didn't want to leave, okay? So I remember thinking, wow, okay, this is interesting. And the hard part is that men don't like to talk about other men about how they feel. They will talk often, and particularly if they had a good relationship with their mother, okay? They feel more natural to talk to her if she's emotionally available and has been, and they'll open up. The biggest thing about men coming in into a group was that the men felt like they had to keep this front up with the other men.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm not going to be a man if I let you know I have feelings.
Or I can't be vulnerable because I'm a man. So, a lot of this conditioning, whether it's females or whether it's men, especially with men, I feel they can't express, they're told to be strong, and being vulnerable is, oh, you can't do this. In India, I see that a lot, and I'm sure it's not just India.
No, it's when I started, and I I'm trying to think of the actual. Most of the men came in via their wife coming initially. But what I discovered is some of their wives seriously had issues that couldn't be solved in psychodrama. They had serious medical issues. And the men were trying to be emotionally available, which is exactly what most women want. Okay?
An emotionally available man.
And these guys were the exception to start with. They were trying to be that, but they were getting beat up constantly. And so I remember the first man, Jim, or he was the first or the second. Jim came in, his wife essentially was being treated by a psychiatrist, one of which I really trusted, that did actually a whole hour of therapy, and he was a Jungian analyst. But what kept happening is, and it became really obvious because she was in women's group, exactly what was going on. Because she was pulling the same thing and doing the same behaviors with the women in women's group as he was saying was happening at home.
Oh.
Okay? But she thought if she went to a woman therapist that I would side with her.
Oh, okay.
Which is not what you do. If you're a couples therapist, you're supposed to understand both parties.
Yeah.
Well, this particular man, she decided if you didn't agree with her, that she was going to go somewhere else. Nowadays, we would probably call that a narcissist, okay? But only word we had was something else, okay? But that's not what it turned out to be as far as a diagnosis. Jim stayed. He helped start one of the first men's groups because he stayed as a client and then he stayed as a training. Now, trainer, he didn't ever become a trainer, but what he became was like an affiliate, like a trained auxiliary, okay? Somebody that could play roles, whatever. And I kept getting men, okay? Now, here's the thing.
So was it not intentional? It just...
Well, it just...
happened.
At one point, I had probably more male clients than female. And part of that was that they got hurt. The other part was that, I don't believe in smashing genders, okay?
Sure.
Either one, all right? And they got told things like, you aren't a guy if you're this way or whatever way. But not all of them were like that. So Jim was learning how to get in touch with what he wanted to. He had teenagers. He loved his kids.
Mm-hmm.
As he progressed on this, he found out exactly how she was emotionally abusing them in a lot of ways. And so the kids would choose different patterns. So the more he got connected with himself, the more he became the parent they went to. And he basically, when we'd have a men's group, would start helping the men get in touch with some of that. Now, here's the thing. They usually came in, not always, because as time went on, the funny thing is word gets out. I live in a community that people tell people, okay? And the men would even refer if they had somebody they knew. A lot of them were men that came in a couples session, and I would meet with the man and the woman separately to try to figure out who they were. And the guys were intrigued because some of them were corporate executives and they had staff, and we'd talk about how they interworked with their staff, what happened. And so they would start staying because they didn't have any kind of instruction on teamwork. I mean, they'd have these people come in, but not talk to them about seeing the dynamics there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tell them, you're going to need more support in order to make some changes. So initially it was like everybody knew me, and I'm the mama that's pushing them into this group. Now, and all of them were kind of like, I don't know about this, okay? Well, when they got in there, and because I had been working with Jim and a few other guys, they found, because here's the thing, there's only so far that I believe in this society, or any society, that a woman can be the container that helps that person reach it. But at some point in time, they've got to make peace with the world in which they live. Here's the other thing. Women have rituals of initiation that have gone on for centuries, just bodily. We know when we become a woman. Men have lost that. There is no ritual of individuation unless it's a bar mitzvah or something that says, you're a man now. In my dad's generation, it might be you got a car, but that's still not that. Or you go off to the service, okay? That is a ritual. They don't have that.
Yeah,
So
we have, like, women have the menses, or you become a mother. So you
and
have
I
these
didn't
stages.
learn this from women. I learned this from talking to other men who work with men. And it's true. They don't. So at some point, how do they separate? Because individuation is a necessary process for both women and men in terms of becoming an adult. Okay? So I realized that, and it just kind of happened, but I knew that what Jim did as he kept working is he gave them that role model. He gave them the role model of a successful man in society. And he would laugh and say, I sell plywood. Well, he was like the regional manager for a major lumber firm. Okay? But he gave them the role model of a man that was emotionally available. Okay? and also a man that had feelings and could feel. I can't give them that. I can give them the container, and I can hold that. So that's what I did.
So it's another man who actually showed them the mirror and showed them that how they can be emotional and they can express and, in that space. So there's this stigma around men's mental health and how they cannot ask for permission or how they cannot enter a group like this, and it's too difficult for them.
Well, have you ever heard of drumming circles?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That was one of the back doors for a lot of men. Robert Fly was one of the guys that did that, and he wrote a book called The Flying Boy. Okay. It's hard, but it's kind of like at some point, that's a point of individuation too. That's saying, I want something more. I don't want to feel the way I feel. One of the books and studies that was done, and this was probably about 15 years ago, but I think it still applies. There was a study done on men and boys, 30-year longitudinal study. And it says what a lot of cultures do, including the U.S., is we tell men what they have to be and to not feel, to shut down, do not feel. Now, here's the funny part. I was a tomboy. I was in athletic sports. All I had was male cousins. You're not going to cry when you play with your male cousins. If you cry, you don't get to play, okay? So I was a little bit different in that most of my friends were guys, because guys would, they had a way of saying when they were upset, they just, kind of like put it off. So they weren't as dramatic, okay? At least that's what I thought in high school. But, so I had friends that were guys.
So this is interesting when you say they weren't as dramatic. It's like if a boy shows or expresses, It's called dramatic, because only women are supposed to be dramatic.
Well, and see, in my mind, I just liked it because if they wanted to say something, they said it, okay? Now, I loved my dad and I loved my grandfather. So I didn't have any issues about men, all right? Would I say that my culture allowed me to be who I was? No, okay? It wasn't cool to be the only female athlete, okay? It wasn't cool to be smart. In my day and age, you needed to be pretty, and somebody asked me the other day what an MRS degree was in college. It's Mrs. Married. I didn't do that, but I had a lot of support not to. So I've had one therapist say, you're like a guy. I said, no, but I understand some of the feelings of not wanting to be how I'm defined, okay? Because I spent time with those guys, I got a little understanding, but not like I did when I would be in group. Because a lot of times, Jim would help facilitate, and I would sit and listen. Being able to be privileged, okay? Now, it's not just the male members that tell a guy he's supposed to be this way. If a woman, for some reason, thinks that a man is expressing feelings and that's not like what they know, they will shame that person just as bad.
Yeah.
You're not being a man when you act like that. Now, I have 6 grandsons, all right? And what I know is because my daughters got a few things. They fight for their boys to be who they want them to be. I mean, in terms of who the child wants to be. And that's important. okay? But in society, what we would say, and this study showed, back to the study, is that all this time up until about by the time of age of 10, that boys have shut down, okay? Because they've been told to shut down.
Yeah.
If they haven't been told by home, they've been told by their soccer mates or their football mates, as you would call it here. They've been told, even the girls would look at them, okay, and say,
So like you say, by the age of 10, they are told to shut down. And then as they grow, then there is a point where the women in their house, maybe it's the wife or the daughter or the mother, now want them to speak up.
Yeah. How ironic is that? Okay, and that's my point. You tell them that.
So how do you create this safe space in the group for someone who's been told you cannot express, you have to shut down, to bringing them to this stage where they feel this is my safe space and I can be me here without anybody judging me? Because I think the safe space is what they don't get.
Well, what starts it is we start it just like we would any other group. You start at the comfort level. What are men comfortable about talking about? What they do. They
What
go
they
in,
do.
yeah, like, they go to a conference and, I'm in sales. I'm in this, okay? They'll talk about that. So you have to start there. Then what happens is you kind of gradually move. Well, when you've got a few men that have been in therapy with me, okay, because again, usually they come through that door, okay?
The back door, like you
Well, they come because they have to learn to take that risk, period, just like a woman does. She's not necessarily automatically going to go into a women's group. She's going to want to have to gain a trust of the therapist or whatever, okay? So that's the first thing. They have to trust you, all right? And that can be tough because here again, they may have had a great mom, but maybe they didn't. And you're the first woman that's listened or been there or heard their story.
without being judgmental.
Right. So you're undoing what they know. Well, the next step is just like a little kid, you're kind of pushing them into that. All right. Just like I have to do with the women, because women operate from the same thing. I got judged in school. This happened, that happened. I didn't fit in, whatever. The guys are going through the same thing. Okay. And probably the most interesting thing was when they were sitting there and I'm asking, tell me about high school. Okay. Well, they start talking about being the nerd, being the fat one, being the one that wasn't athletic, being the one that, felt isolated. Same kind of conversations you're going to get from women because they too had how they looked and how they didn't, which I thought was interesting because a lot of times women think we're the ones that are all worried about that. No. And here's the funny part. The other funny part. Sometimes we get stuck in our adolescent.
Yeah.
So we go out and we get in a relationship and the woman's worrying about what she looks like and she thinks her husband's not.
He's equally worried.
Yeah. Same thing. And listening to them tell the story, okay? And maybe when they get out and they're older, and this is one of the things I recognized with my first husband, is that he was really nerdy in high school and he didn't have any dates too much. He didn't even go to what we call his prom, which is the end of the year when you graduate kind of thing. And as he collected money, and of course he got he filled out. He wasn't, as gangly. And I met him when he was, and it didn't really matter to me. But money and success attracts what? Okay? Women. Okay?
Okay. Yeah.
They think that. All right? But here's the same 15-year-old boy inside that doesn't know. It's like, oh, wow. And I watched that with a lot of men. And I'd ask them that question for a reason, because maybe they were successful now. They were the vice president of a major oil company, but they still felt like the 15-year-old kid that the prom queen would never have looked at. And now he's got the prom queen. Okay?
I saw you do an interesting thing a couple of days back.
Okay.
We had one man in our group, and you asked him to build a fort. And he could go in because he was the only one. We were, about 22 of us, and he was the only man in there. Can you tell us about why did you ask him to make that fort, and what was it?
Well, contrary to what a lot of people might think, he's very intuitive and he feels a lot. And the reason I say that is that there's always this assumption that men don't, but they do. And he's a younger guy. He's not probably 30-ish, okay? But he'd just been through a lot and was surrounded by a lot of emotion and had to be, because there was a lot of loss in the family, probably the adult in that situation, and really didn't have a chance to pick up his own emotions. So he walks into a group of 21 women who are having all kinds of emotions. I don't know too many men that could sit in there and handle that.
Yes.
With either not trying to fix it because that's what they think they're supposed to do or whatever. So because he hadn't had the experience of being able to own his own, he was having trouble just sitting there. And so I thought, okay, he needs to have a space that's his. A space that, and I thought of my grandsons, okay? And I even thought of myself when I was little, needing to build something. And it was kind of like saying, here's your screen. If you need to get away from all of this emotion, you can. And you can have a place for yourself. And it's not that he doesn't understand women. In fact, it's probably the very opposite.
Yeah.
He really does. But I would have probably said the same thing to anybody. But I knew what had been going on for him. And because in his role as a man, he couldn't show his emotions, he needed a place that he could. And then he could come out after he had understood them and be able to tell us about it. Okay.
That's the amazing part. I think most men have this invisible fort. When they feel too overwhelmed or there are too many emotions and they know that they can't express, they go in there. But the insight I got from there was that when you allowed him to create it, he didn't need it for very long. He was there just for 15 minutes. And then he came out and he could be there with the group because I think you gave him permission to go in that fort. So like we just spoke a while back, that by the age of 10, we shut them down. And then they go into this fort. And now we are trying all our life to pull them back out.
Well, and that's not all of it. I mean, I didn't particularly like how John Gray, who wrote Men Are for Mars, Women Are for Venus, Well, if you knew anything about his home life, you'd know that it might be a little tilted, okay? But what he said is men have caves. So women commonly say, he's shutting me out. A relationship is a dance, okay? It is knowing, because yes, they need a place to go, because if you have not been allowed to experience your feelings, having someone else's feelings directed at you becomes extremely overwhelming. Okay?
Mm.
So it's like too much. Now, it doesn't mean that what the woman in the relationship shouldn't feel, but she needs to understand, if she puts all this on him, he doesn't know what to do with his own, let alone what to do with hers.
Yeah, and now you're giving him yours.
So he's going to run to his cave. He's going to go shut down. Okay? So I would tell him things like this. I'd go, okay, we're going to have a timer. You know, you talk for 5 minutes, you talk for 5 minutes. But it's like their way of dealing with things. I mean, one guy described it to me. He says, yeah, we go to the gym. Somebody talks, a woman will sit and talk about her divorce and on and on. He said, we go in there and, yeah, you're divorced. Yeah, it's a bitch. Lift my weight, lift my weight. And it's like, because that's how they've been taught. Never mind the fact that what they've done is probably put those feelings in file 13. Okay? Now, we can't ask them to open up file 13 and then tell them how they should feel any more than that we want, when we start feeling, somebody to tell us we can't feel that way. Okay? And one of the biggest things is that in a culture where being the provider is a big deal, did anybody ask that child when he's a boy if that's what he wanted to do? No. Did anybody ask the girl if she wanted to stay home and just cook and clean and do all that?
No.
I hated that, okay? My mother ironed sheets, all right? When my first husband and I got married, they created permanent press shirts. She calls me up and she goes, well, have you ironed his shirts? And I said, what do you think permanent press is, Mom? And she goes, well, and I go, now, mind you, this is the same mom that wanted me to go to college. So these two things just don't quite fit.
This box.
Yeah, but you're still supposed to do that.
You're supposed to do this. You are a boy. You're supposed to do this.
Well, and did anybody ask my ex if he'd rather be an artist because he could draw like Michelangelo? And he loved art? No. Earn money. And he was good at it because his dad was good at it. But his soul didn't get fed. Okay? So the real question is the definition that we give men in this society.
And then money, success, status is not just for the women, but they start competing with other men. Because
they have to compete if they're going to be. And the funny thing is that if you've been an athlete like I have, I understand competition. But I didn't like it. Okay? I would just do the best I could do. And if I won, I won.
Can you share a powerful moment or breakthrough that happened in the group?
Well, there's probably several. I can share one has its comical side and its other side, okay? Well, being a psychodramatist and very experiential and thinking out of the box, I was trying to get the men in my group to understand they have a little kid inside. Because if you ask a man outright, he'll say, what are you talking about? Okay? You ask a woman, she knows. Okay? So it was a point in the group where some of them just quite couldn't get it. So I said, okay. They came in. I had booked a movie theater, and in it was a movie, I think it was called by Bruce Willis, The Kid. He was the main actor when he was younger.
Yeah, The Kid.
And in that movie, his little kid inside came back because I guess his older man had sent him. Well, he didn't know who this kid was, and it would bug him, and he would go along with him, and he couldn't leave him. And he was a marketing man that was just focused on making the next deal and not feeling emotional about anything that had happened to him. So I took the guys to the movie. I bought them a kids package with popcorn and Cokes and candy.
The men from your group?
Yes.
Wow.
Because, it's a 2-hour group, so we got time to go to the movies. So we all went to the movies. All right? Part of what happened with Bruce is he had to acknowledge that some things had happened to him. And part of the reason he was having a tough relationship with the woman that loved him was she felt like she couldn't get in because he wouldn't tell her how he felt. Or he would go into that cave all the time. Well, they watched the movie. Nothing was said. We come back to the group room. Dead silence. Well, we met every 2 weeks. So I said, okay, we'll see what happens. I thought, was it a dud? Okay. When they came back in 2 weeks, all ranges of emotion came up. One of the coaches who coached a basketball team, and he was a tough coach, and I had to really work to reach him. And so I talked to him about the head of the Lakers, okay, the head coach, who Bill something, had been that for years. It's called the Sacred Hoop.
Okay.
And he talked about bringing those guys in with huge egos and talking to their little boys. And he had a bunch of kids, diverse backgrounds, some from the hood, some from wherever, and he was working with them. So that was my way to get into him as a client, because he was being sent or had been sent for anger issues. Now, mind you, his wife was a social worker, and she would bait him.
Oh.
Okay? She didn't like it because I could see what she was doing, not just what he was doing. I was supposed to side with her. Well, she was playing games with him. Now, that's part of the story. So he comes in, he sits down, and he starts crying. And he says, I treat my son this way.
What he saw in the movie.
How he saw Bruce not listen.
Yeah.
And I said, so who treated you this way? And he goes, my dad. And that was the beginning of a drama, because his little kid was hurting. And that's where the anger came from. And that's what most women do not understand, that they see the anger. Unless it's absolute blind rage, it's grief. They can't show grief in most societies.
But they are allowed to show anger.
But they are allowed to show anger. And he just cried. Another man talked about, and this is when it came out, because once that man said that, another man started talking about how his mother had walked around with very little clothes on, and he was an adolescent, and he'd never told anybody what that did to him. Now, in the world of abuse in the U.S., that's abuse. That's sexual abuse on some level. And he was so angry because she taunted him almost. And in that instance, I was the person that he was most connected to, but also the only female in the room. So the men let him rage at me until he started crying, because every relationship he had been a replica of being taunted and not being good enough. And you start to see that given the space, they'll talk. But you have to be ready to be as the director, because they have a connection to you. And it's not because they don't like you. They can de-roll you because they do like you. They do respect you. But I was everybody's mother, everybody's wife, everybody's daughter, aunt, grandmother, liked or unliked, okay? So training Jim was part of it. And then the other guys learned. And so they would help each other. And that's the real goal, okay? Because you're just there to help it along. And it's a rite of passage where they leave the world of the women and go to the men for a while. But they do it being whole, okay? This is what a lot of the drumming circles were. This is a lot of all that kind of pain. And basically, it was a privilege to work with them because I got to see their inner world and probably never would have seen that.
True. So, what is one thing you wish more people understood about men's emotional health?
They need permission, and that's exactly what you said. They need permission to be vulnerable, be themselves, be okay. And it's not just the men that are telling the men this. It's also the women. If you want your man to be emotionally available, give him the space to do that. Understand that if you're going to be able to help him, you've got to help yourself. You can't just point at him and tell him, you need to do this. The trouble is, in a lot of societies, the pressure of retaining all that emotion leads to men dying of heart attacks, men having suicide, men withdrawing, okay? And, you know, a healthy kid needs both parents.
Yes.
They don't just need to see their mom be emotional. They need to be able to see that their dad can do that as well.
Yes.
And
which again gives, if it's a boy, it gives that boy permission to just be himself.
And for the girl, they set, I can't tell you how many times I would tell my men, you set the mark for your daughters.
Yes.
And they are going to either marry somebody like you or think they marry somebody the opposite who it probably isn't. So the better the man you are, the better the father you can be, because they need that too. The best way to protect the daughter is not necessarily to be this big bravado, but it's to teach her that she needs to expect the man to be there for her. And if you are, I mean, I look at my son-in-law with my daughter, my oldest granddaughter, and he is there for her. And yes, she gets to see Dad when he's crying, when he's whatever. And he used to play football, and he's about 225 pounds. But he has a wife, my daughter, that has helped him be okay with all that. So I want him to know. And there's help if you want it, okay? And some of the men were the ones that actually were the ones that helped their family. It wasn't always the woman.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kay. This was a very insightful conversation. A lot of things that I will sit with and process from this is permission, the fort, space that men need, and how important it is for them. This was lovely having you and talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.